The U.S. State Department is telling Americans in parts of Mexico to shelter in place, guys. Listen, this is not because of a hurricane, all right? Like, this is not because of a protest, but entire cities are being locked down by overall cartel retaliation. Listen, vehicles are being torched, roads are being blocked, businesses are being burned. This is not just random violence here, okay? Like, this looks like cartel insurgency. Let's jump into it.
This is exactly what they're doing in Puerto Vallarta. What they are doing is burning buses, lighting gas stations on fire, because they want to create terror for those who struck a nerve. This will create compression amongst those other cartels. We may see more violence stem from this, but what we're seeing right now is their capability for violence, and this should awake Americans up. This is why it's so important to close our borders.
The borders are essentially closed, and the drugs flowing across, Griff, have dwindled to nearly zero, thank goodness. Not quite there, but certainly the human trafficking. What is there for people on the left to catch on to at this point?
So this is a big deal, Harris, and it couldn't be a more dangerous time to be in Mexico because of what Sheriff Lamb was talking about. So a power vacuum was now created. El Mencho was the top trafficker of cocaine coming across in the Jalisco New Generation cartel. Now, remember, last summer, El Mayo, who was the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, was taken. The U.S. captured him. It led to a spike in 400% increase in homicides in Mexico. Now we're going to see it even more so because Jalisco New Generation is the dominant cartel. And they're going to start retaliating now against Mexican officials because of this. And don't forget, for 4 years under the Biden administration, they lined their pockets with money. That's why you see these stunning videos of the cartel leaders in armored vehicles that rival U.S. military firepower.
Right.
They're going to retaliate against the officials, but then they're going to fight the rival factions that are trying to fill El Mencho. And so it's really a lot of unanswered questions of really where and how they're going to retaliate against Mexican officials, and then the war that's going to go on with the cartel, which puts Americans stuck in Mexico
at risk.
Very high
Absolutely.
risk.
Yeah, the list last night, Tommy, that some of us put out on social media of all the areas that were basically in lockdown, shelter in place, was pretty long. It wasn't just Jalisco and Puerto Vallarta and some of the other areas where we know Americans go, but it was a lot of different states within that country.
I think Americans need to understand something that doesn't feel comfortable, but anytime you as an American travel to Mexico, there is a limited amount of things that the American government can do for you there. Yes, they've put out the warnings. They said shelter in place. They can help you a little bit with the embassy. But when you decide to travel to Mexico, a lot of people think you go to a resort, you're going to be safe, nothing happens there. Well, I think they're finding out the hard way that that's not necessarily true. In 2017, a friend of mine from California was stabbed to death in Playa del Carmen. And that was just walking from bar to bar in a resort area. So I've been sounding the alarm on this for almost 10 years now, saying, if you're an American going to Mexico, have a great time, but understand the risks. And to the point about President Trump and his message, we saw it in the first administration, his message to Mexico was the threat of terror if the Mexican military doesn't do their part to secure the border. And then the Mexican military stepped up. Now we flash forward to administration 2.0. President Trump says, I'm not going to tolerate not only the human trafficking, but the drug trafficking. And now the Mexican military, once again, stepping up to do their part to secure their own country. That, in my opinion, is a direct response to President Trump and how tough he's been on this issue.
It is.
Talk to me about
completely.
because you knew we'd get there eventually, and Tommy got us there. You've got a new round coming potentially that the president and his staff have worked on to get beyond what the U.S. Supreme Court did. It sounds like from what Tommy's saying, you may need those more immediately, particularly given the situation that's going on
a national security basis, which is the reason that he implemented those tariffs in the first place. Liberation Day, April of 2025. Fast forward to now. The steel and aluminum tariffs, by the way, are still in place. That's a separate issue than what the Supreme Court ruled on.
Right.
And that is a
Those
big
are
piece
sectoral.
Yes.
Right,
and
right.
that's why you've seen more and more auto manufacturing that is coming back into the United States. Again, is this a safety concern? Because before the parts were going back, they were going from Canada to the U.S. down to Mexico and then back. Sometimes these components were going back and forth to Mexico. A lot of that is ending, and a lot of the automakers had expressed concerns for the safety of their employees in Mexico. The U.S. government has not only do you have this designation of a organization with Jalisco, but you also have them giving us a price tag on the cartel industry as it exists right now in Mexico. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry on an annual basis because they're not just into fentanyl and into meth and cocaine. human trafficking. They're also, they steal oil from Pemex and then they sell it. They have extortion operations around the country. The different groups of the cartel do.
It's not just around that country.
They extort the avocado farmers. They extort small businesses, nightclubs. It is an unbelievable. So even though the border has been effectively shut down, even though to your point, production has really slowed down, in particular in the southern part, like in the Sonoran region. We've seen that. Still,
La Costa Chica
this is
area.
not exactly a moment in time where the cartels are going to say, oh, we're just going to walk away from the billions of dollars. And by the way, they have crypto trading operations as well. It is so much more than what Americans, I think, understand.
Mining.
Yeah, you know, Emily, as we look at these pictures from there and all the videos over the weekend, it's terrifying.
It is.
It is. Thank you for pointing out, too, the vast enterprise network that the cartels have been engaging in for decades. They are loath to and will not surrender $1 of that multi-billion-dollar illicit revenue that they've been getting for years at all. And they've been exploiting the northern border through our northern neighbors who don't have the same trafficking and human trafficking and illicit types of data, statistics, and tracking that we do here in the States. The green gold of the avocado farms, the oil seizures, those cartels have that entire country and its economics and ecosystem under a tight fist. And I'm worried that the news cycle covers this as Americans are in the danger that they are, but that it will go back to the thin veneer of safety that we've been enjoying as tourists for decades. We know that power vacuums beget violence and exploitation, and that's what's been happening this entire time. That's why there are those multiple factions, because back in the day, it used to just be one. Now, Jalisco's on top, right? It didn't used to be like that, but this is what shifts. The last Mexican elections were the bloodiest of all time, and the amount of journalists that have been murdered, the amount of influencers on live streaming, the amount of targeted,
like bombarded. It was
what's
crazy.
the word I'm looking for? When the cartels are recruiting young people there, it starts at a very young age. They hold their families hostage. They have now music and you know, pop culture influences for these kids. It is a reign of terror. And to think
it's not even just that, though,
that the government is somehow distinct from the cartels is a very naive and foolish way of thinking. They are deeply embedded, and I'm not quite sure what our next steps are diplomatically, but it requires a very complex and nuanced approach to this country and to those cartels. I think that takes years of investments. This is not just a current administration diplomatic solution.
It's such a great point. I was just...
Okay, guys, I think we're good on this one here. And just so we can kind of get a gist of what's happening here. Listen, hold on here, or understand this here. Now, the young kids that are basically being involved in like the cartel type of lifestyle, yeah, they're seeing it, right? They're seeing a bunch of people making a gigantic amount of money in a country where people are generally consistently impoverished, right? They're seeing that. They're looking up to that and saying, just like rappers like in the 90s and 80s, right? They're seeing these people basically coming up while everyone else is still impoverished. So, yeah, of course, you're going to start idealizing that type of thing. I wouldn't say that it has anything to do with large scale. How about this here? There could be some anecdotal small batch type of evidence that will say that families are basically being, you know, held hostage and things like this here. Understand, small batch, I would definitely say that's probably an exception and not the actual rule. And how I dictate rules, I mean more than 50% of the people, if that makes any sense, right? So let's say 51% would say, you know what, that may be the rule. All right, that's just kind of what's happening at all times. If something tells me it's probably more like 10%, and the other ones are just basically seeing them winning in a way, and they're just like, hold on, guys, I want to be involved in this too. My family is impoverished, right? And that's kind of probably what's going on with that specifically. Now, listen, guys. Now, when it comes to, you know, how this entire thing happened, like, understand America had a big part to kind of play in this here. Obviously, like a joint venture to basically take Mencho down, right? That happened. So I want to see exactly what kind of comes from this in terms of if there will be any type of like cartel retaliation on American soil. I definitely do hope that that's not a thing here. I do also agree about our southern border, you know, needing to basically be, you know, kind of, you know, patched up large scale, and there needs to be a little bit more protection there. Now, the amount of illegal immigrants that have been coming through have definitely changed. The amount of like trafficking has also changed drastically. These are good things here, guys, right? But as long as they have access in some way, we have a problem. We are dealing with a narco state, without a doubt here. One of the women here basically pointed out that there's no way that this could not have affected the actual Mexican government. You're right. There's no way. There's no way. Listen, we've already, had whistleblowers specifically coming from Mexico that said Sheinbaum was basically put in power by the cartel. Who doesn't believe that? She says, no, we're not a narco state. How dare you say that? That's being racist. You're a narco state. Again, I think I told some anecdotal evidence yesterday when this thing basically happened about me being legitimately in the mountains of North Carolina. And I met like a guy from Mexico City, and he, out of nowhere, unprovoked, started talking about his country. Right. And he basically said, yeah, of course she is. Everyone knows she is. But of course, to the American population and people, she's going to say, no, that's not true, because it makes her look bad, basically. Right. You are a leader of a country, a pretty large country, okay, an important country, and you are in fact doing nothing more than the bidding of the cartel. Let's just be honest here, guys. It is what it is here. I mean, just own it, right? I mean, listen, Iran owns their nonsense. North Korea owns their nonsense. The leader of Eritrea owns their nonsense. Understand this here, guys. Just own it. It is what it is here. Why do you care so much? Because we're going to do something about it. That's why you care. Because we already labeled basically Mexico that type of place, let's say, this year, right? And they definitely are committing acts of terror on the street right now. So you're kind of confirming our overall, external analysis, my boys. All right. But either way, listen, you guys have an absolutely amazing day. Enjoy your day thoroughly. As more develops, we'll definitely follow it. All right.